The British Aerospace Sea Harrier is a naval short takeoff and vertical takeoff and landing jet fighter, reconnaissance and attack aircraft, the second member of the Harrier Jump Jet family developed. It first entered service with the Royal Navy in April 1980 as the Sea Harrier FRS1 and became informally known as the Shar, unusual in an era in which most naval and land-based air superiority fighters were large and supersonic. The principal role of the subsonic Sea Harrier was to provide air defense of Royal Navy aircraft carriers. The Sea Harrier served in the Falklands War, both of the Gulf Wars, and the Balkans conflicts. On all occasions it mainly operated from aircraft carriers positioned within the conflict zone. Its usage in the Falklands War was its most high-profile and important success, where it was the only fixed-wing fighter available to protect the British task force. The Sea Harriers shot down 20 enemy aircraft during the conflict, with one lost to enemy ground fire. They were also used to launch ground attacks in the same manner as the Harriers operated by the Royal Air Force. The Sea Harrier was marketed for sales abroad, but by 1983 India was the only operator other than Britain after sales to Argentina and Australia were unsuccessful. A second, updated version for the Royal Navy was made in 1993 as the Sea Harrier FA2, improving its air-to-air abilities and weapons compatibilities. Along with a more powerful engine, this version continued manufacture until 1998. The aircraft was withdrawn from service early by the Royal Navy. In 2006, the Sea Harrier remained in service for another decade with the Indian Navy until its retirement in 2016, thus ending the career of the historic British jet. Development. In the post-war era, the Royal Navy began contracting in parallel with the breakup of the British Empire overseas and the emergence of the Commonwealth of Nations, reducing the need for a larger navy. By 1960, the last battleship, HMS Vanguard, was retired from the Navy, having been in service for less than 15 years. Perhaps the biggest sign of the new trend towards naval austerity came in 1966, when the planned CVA-01 class of large aircraft carriers destined for the Royal Navy was cancelled. During this time, requirements within the Royal Navy began to form for a vertical and/or short takeoff and landing carrier-based interceptor to replace the de Havilland Sea Vixen. Afterward, the first VSDOL tests on a ship began with the Hawker Siddeley P1127 landing on HMS Ark Royal in 1963. A second concept for the future of naval aviation emerged in the early 1970s as the first of a new class of through-deck cruisers was planned. These were very carefully and politically designated as cruisers to deliberately avoid the term aircraft carrier, in order to increase the chances of funding from a hostile political climate against expensive capital ships. They were considerably smaller than the previously sought CVA-01. These ships were ordered as the Invincible class in 1973, and are now popularly recognized as aircraft carriers. Almost immediately upon their construction, a ski jump was added to the end of the 170-meter deck, enabling the carriers to effectively operate a small number of VSDOL jets. The Royal Air Force's Hawker Siddeley Harrier GR1S had entered service in April 1969. A navalized variant of the Harrier was developed by Hawker Siddeley to serve on the upcoming ships. This became the Sea Harrier. In 1975, the Royal Navy ordered 24 Sea Harrier FRS1 aircraft, the first of which entered service in 1978. During this time, Hawker Siddeley became part of British Aerospace through nationalisation in 1977. By The time the prototype Sea Harrier was flown at Dunsfold on the 20th of August 1978, the order had been increased to 34. The Sea Harrier was declared operational in 1981 on board the first Invincible-class ship HMS Invincible, and further aircraft joined the aging HMS Hermes aircraft carrier later that year. Following the key role in the 1982 Falklands War, several lessons were learned from the aircraft's performance, which led to approval for an upgrade of the fleet to FRS-2 standard to be given in 1984. The first flight of the prototype took place in September 1988 and a contract was signed for 29 upgraded aircraft. In December that year, in 1990, the Navy ordered 18 new-build FA-2s, at a unit cost of around £12 million. 4 further upgraded aircraft were ordered in 1994. The first aircraft was delivered on the 2nd of April 1993. Design. The Sea Harrier is a subsonic aircraft designed to fill strike, reconnaissance and fighter roles. It features a single Rolls-Royce Pegasus turbofan engine with 2 intakes and 4 vectorable nozzles. It has 2 landing gear on the fuselage and 2 outrigger landing gear on the wings. The Sea Harrier is equipped with 4 wing and 3 fuselage pylons for carrying weapons and external fuel tanks. Use of the ski jump allowed the aircraft to take off from a short flight deck with a heavier loadout than otherwise possible, although it can also take off like a conventional loaded fighter without thrust vectoring from a normal airport runway. The Sea Harrier was largely based on the Harrier GR3, but was modified to have a raised cockpit with a bubble canopy for greater visibility, and an extended forward fuselage to accommodate the Ferranti Blue Fox radar. Parts were changed to use corrosion-resistant alloys. The coatings were added to protect against the marine environment. After the Falklands War, the Sea Harrier was fitted with the new anti-ship Sea Eagle missile. The Sea Harrier FA-2 featured the Blue Vixen radar, which was described as one of the most advanced pulse Doppler radar systems in the world. The Blue Fox radar was seen by some critics as having comparatively low performance for what was available at the time of procurement. The Blue Vixen formed the basis for development of the Eurofighter Typhoon's captor radar. The Sea Harrier FA-2 also carried the AIM-120 AMRAAM missile, the first UK aircraft to be provided with this capability. An upgraded model of the Pegasus engine, the Pegasus Mk106, was used in the Sea Harrier FA-2. In response to the threat of radar-based anti-aircraft weapons, electronic countermeasures were added. Other improvements included an increase to the air-to-air weapons load, look-down radar, increased range, and improved cockpit displays. The cockpit in the Sea Harrier includes a conventional center stick arrangement and left-hand throttle. In addition to normal flight controls, the Harrier has a lever for controlling the direction of the 4 vectorable nozzles. The nozzles point rearward with the lever in the forward position for horizontal flight. With the lever back, the nozzles point downward for vertical takeoff or landing. The usefulness of the vertical landing capability of the Sea Harrier was demonstrated in an incident on 6 June 1983, when Sub-Lieutenant Ian Watson lost contact with the aircraft carrier HMS Illustrious and had to land Sea Harrier ZA-176 on the foredeck of the Spanish cargo ship Aurigo. In 2005, although already timetabled to be retired, a Sea Harrier was modified with an autoland system to allow the fighter to perform a safe vertical landing without any pilot interaction. Despite the pitching of a ship posing a natural problem, the system was designed to be aware of such data, and successfully performed a landing at sea in May 2005. Operational history. Royal Navy entry into service. The first 3 Sea Harriers were a development batch and were used for clearance trials. The first production aircraft was delivered to RNAS Yeovilton in 1979 to form an intensive flying trials unit. In March 1980, the intensive flying trials unit became 899 Naval Air Squadron and would act as the land-borne headquarters unit for the type. The first operational squadron, 800 Naval Air Squadron, was also formed in March 1980, initially to operate from HMS Invincible before transferred to HMS Hermes. In January 1981, a second Operation Squadron, 801 Naval Air Squadron, was formed to operate from HMS Invincible. Falklands War Sea Harriers took part in the Falklands War of 1982, flying from the aircraft carriers HMS Invincible and HMS Hermes. The Sea Harriers performed the primary air defense role with a secondary role of ground attack. The RAF Harrier GR3 provided the main ground attack force. A total of 28 Sea Harriers and 14 Harrier GR3s were deployed in the theater. The Sea Harrier squadrons shot down 20 Argentine aircraft in air-to-air combat with no air-to-air losses, although 2 Sea Harriers were lost to ground fire and 4 to accidents. Out of the total Argentine air losses, 28% were shot down by Harriers. A number of factors contributed to the failure of the Argentinian fighters to shoot down a Sea Harrier. Although the Mirage 3 and Dagger jets were faster, the Sea Harrier was considerably more maneuverable. Moreover, the Harrier employed the latest AIM-9L Sidewinder missiles and a Blue Fox radar. Contrary to contemporary reports that VFing proved decisive in dogfights, the maneuver was not used by RN pilots in the Falklands, as it was only used in emergencies against enemies unfamiliar with the aircraft. The British pilots had superior air combat training, one manifestation of which was that they thought they noticed Argentinian pilots occasionally releasing weapons outside of their operating parameters. This is now thought to have been mirages releasing external fuel tanks rather than weapons, and turning away from conflict with the Sea Harrier. This later reduced their capability to fight an effective campaign against the Sea Harrier due to reduced range and lack of external fuel tanks. British aircraft received fighter control from warships in San Carlos water, although its effectiveness was limited by the being stationed close to the islands, which severely limited the effectiveness of the radar. The differences in tactics and training between 800 Squadron and 801 Squadron has been a point of criticism, suggesting that the losses of several ships were preventable had Sea Harriers from Hermes been used more effectively. Both sides' aircraft were operating in adverse conditions. Argentine aircraft were forced to operate from the mainland because airfields on the Falklands were only suited for propeller-driven transports. In addition, fears partly aroused by the bombing of Port Stanley Airport by a British Vulcan bomber added to the Argentinians' decision to operate them from afar. As most Argentine aircraft lacked in-flight refueling capability, they were forced to operate at the limit of the range. The Sea Harriers also had limited fuel reserves due to the tactical decision to station the British carriers out of Exocet missile range and the dispersal of the fleet. The result was that an Argentine aircraft could only allow 5 minutes over the islands to search and attack an objective, while a Sea Harrier could stay near to 30 minutes waiting in the Argentine approach corridors and provide combat air patrol coverage for up to an hour. The Sea Harriers were outnumbered by the available Argentinian aircraft. and were on occasion decoyed away by the activities of the Esquadron Phoenix, a civilian jet aircraft used by the Argentine Air Force. They had to operate without a fleet early warning system such as AWACS that would have been available to a full NATO fleet in which the Royal Navy had expected to operate, which was a significant weakness in the operational environment. However, it is now known that Chile did provide early radar warning to the task force. The result was that the Sea Harriers could not establish complete air superiority and prevent Argentine attacks during day and night, nor could they completely stop the daily C-130 Hercules transport's night flights to the islands. A total of 6 Sea Harriers were lost during the war to either enemy fire, accidents or mechanical failure. The total aggregate loss rate for both the Harriers and Sea Harriers on strike operations was 2.3%. Operations in the 1990s. The Sea Harrier saw action in war again when it was deployed in the 1992 to 1995 conflict in Bosnia, part of the Yugoslav wars. It launched raids on Serb forces and provided air support for the international task force units conducting operations Deny Flight and Deliberate Force against the Army of Republika Srpska. On the 16th of April 1994, a Sea Harrier of the 801 Naval Air Squadron, operating from the aircraft carrier HMS Ark Royal, was brought down by IGLA-1 surface-to-air missile fired by the Army of Republika Srpska while attempting to bomb 2 Bosnian Serb tanks. The pilot, Lieutenant Nick Richardson, ejected and landed in territory controlled by friendly Bosnian Muslims. It was used again in the 1999 NATO campaign against the Federal Republic of Yugoslavia in Operation Allied Force. Sea Harriers, which operated from HMS Invincible, frequently patrolled the airspace to keep Yugoslavian MiGs on the ground. They were also deployed to Sierra Leone on board HMS Illustrious in 2000, which was itself part of a Royal Navy convoy to supply and reinforce British intervention forces in the region. Retirement. The Sea Harrier was withdrawn from service in 2006 and the last remaining aircraft from 801 Naval Air Squadron were decommissioned on 29 March 2006. The plans for retirement were announced in 2002 by the Ministry of Defense. The aircraft's replacement, the F-35 Lightning II, was originally due in 2012, the MOD arguing that significant expenditure would be required to upgrade the fleet for only 6 years of service. By March 2010, the F-35's introduction had been pushed back to 2016 at the earliest, with the price doubled. The decision to retire the Sea Harrier early has been criticized by some officers within the military. Both versions of Harrier experienced reduced engine performance in the higher ambient temperatures of the Middle East, which restricted the weight of payload that the Harrier could return to the carrier in vertical recoveries. This was due to the safety factors associated with aircraft land-on weights. The option to install higher-rated Pegasus engines would not have been as straightforward as on the Harrier GR7 upgrade and would have likely been an expensive and slow process. Furthermore, the Sea Harriers were subject to a generally more hostile environment than land-based Harriers, with corrosive salt spray a particular problem. A number of aircraft were retained by the School of Flight Deck Operations at RNAS Culdrose. The Royal Navy's Fleet Air Arm would continue to share the other component of Joint Force Harrier. Harrier GR7 and the upgraded Harrier GR9 were transferred to Royal Navy squadrons in 2006, but were retired prematurely a few years later due to budget cuts. The UK plans to purchase the developed F-35B to be operated from the Royal Navy's future Queen Elizabeth-class aircraft carrier. Although withdrawn from active Royal Navy service, Sea Harriers are used to train naval aircraft handlers at the Royal Navy School of Flight Deck Operations, Indian Navy. In 1977, the Indian government approved of plans to acquire the Sea Harrier for the Indian Navy. Prior to this, rumors reportedly were circulating of a potential Indian purchase of the Soviet VSTOL-capable Yak-36. The BAE Seahawk was phased out from the Indian Navy in 1978, in preparation for the purchase of Sea Harriers. In November 1979, India placed its first order for 6 Sea Harrier FRS Mk-51 fighters and 2 TMK-60 trainers. The first 3 Sea Harriers arrived at Dublin Airport on the 16th of December 1983, and were inducted the same year. 10 more Sea Harriers were purchased in November 1985. Eventually a total of 30 Harriers were procured, 25 for operational use and the remainder as dual-sea trainer aircraft. Until the 1990s, significant portions of pilot training was carried out in Britain due to limited aircraft availability. The introduction of the Sea Harrier allowed for the retirement of India's previous carrier fighter aircraft, the Hawker Seahawk, as well as for the Navy's aircraft carrier INS Vikrant, to be extensively modernized between 1987 and 1989. India has operated Sea Harriers from both the aircraft carriers INS Vikrant and INS Virat. The Sea Harrier allowed several modern missiles to be introduced into naval operations, such as the British anti-ship Sea Eagle missile, and the French Matra Magic missile for air-to-air combat. Other ordnance has included 68mm rockets, runway denial bombs, cluster bombs, and podded 30mm cannons. There have been a significant number of accidents involving the Sea Harrier. This accident rate has caused approximately half the fleet to be lost, with only 11 fighters remaining in service. Following a crash in August 2009, all Sea Harriers were temporarily grounded for inspection. Since the beginning of operational service in the Indian Navy, 7 pilots have died in 17 crashes involving the Sea Harrier, usually during routine sorties. In 2006, the Indian Navy expressed interest in acquiring up to 8 of the Royal Navy's recently retired Sea Harrier FA2s in order to maintain their operational Sea Harrier fleet. Neither the Sea Harrier FA2's Blue Vixen radar, the radar warning receiver or AMR/AAM capability was proposed to be included. Certain U.S. software would also be uninstalled prior to shipment. By October 2006, reports emerged that the deal had not materialized due to the cost of airframe refurbishment. In 2006, the Indian Navy was in the process of upgrading up to 15 Sea Harriers in collaboration with Israel by installing the ELTA M2032 radar and the Rafael Derby medium-range air-to-air BVR missile. This will enable the Sea Harrier to remain in Indian service until beyond 2012, and also see limited service off the new carriers it will acquire by the time frame. By 2009, crashes had reduced India's fleet to 12. India plans to introduce larger aircraft carriers that can operate Russian MiG-29K carrier fighters from the flight decks to replace the Sea Harrier. The Sea Harriers operated from INS Virat for the last time on 6 March 2016. On the 11th of May 2016, a ceremony was held at INS Hansa, Dublin, Goa to commemorate the phasing out of Sea Harriers from INAS 300. Sea Harriers and MiG-29 kiloseconds performed an air display at the ceremony, marking the final flight of the Sea Harriers in the Indian Navy. INAS 300 subsequently inducted MiG-29K Cub fighters to replace the retired Sea Harrier fleet. Variants: Sea Harrier FRS-57 FRS1s were delivered between 1978 and 1988. Most survivors converted to Sea Harrier FA2 specifications from 1988. Sea Harrier FRS, single-seat fighter, reconnaissance and attack aircraft made for the Indian Navy, similar to the British FRS1. Unlike the FRS-1 Sea Harrier, it is fitted with Matra of 550 Magic air-to-air missiles. These aircraft were later upgraded with the ELTA-L M2032 radar and the Rafael Derby BVRAAM missiles. Sea Harrier F, upgrade of FRS-1 feat in 1988, featuring the Blue Vixen Pulse Doppler radar and the AIM-120 AMRAAM missile. Operators: India, Indian Navy, Indian Naval Air Arm, United Kingdom, Royal Navy Fleet Air Arms. Survivors: a number of surviving Sea Harrier airframes are held by museums and private owners, and some others are at the Royal Navy School of Flight Deck Operations at RNAS Culdrose. The following is an incomplete list of some of the surviving aircraft. India 1 BAE Sea Harrier FRS-51 preserved at the Naval Aviation Museum in Goa, India. United Kingdom 9 Sea Harrier FA2S XZ440, ZE579, ZE690, ZE692, ZH797, ZH798, ZH802, ZH803, ZH813 are still used by the School of Flight Deck Operations at RNAS Culdrose. As of November 2012, 4 Sea Harriers ZD611, ZH804 and ZH811 are stored at RNAS Culdrose. As of 2012, Sea Harrier FA2 ZD694 is exhibited at the Midland Air Museum, Coventry. 2 Sea Harriers, an FRS-1 XZ493-001N and an FA2 are also on public display at the Fleet Air Arm Museum at Yeovilton. Sea Harrier FA2 ZH796 moved to Cosford DSAE in April 2014. Sea Harrier FRS-1 FA2 ZA176 is preserved at the Newark Air Museum. Sea Harrier FRS-1 FA2 XZ457 is restored and on public display at Boscombe Down Aviation Collection. Sea Harrier FA2 ZA195 is displayed at the Tangmere Military Aviation Museum. Sea Harrier FA2 XZ459 is preserved by a private owner near Shoreham Airport. Sea Harrier T-8ZD992 was written off in an accident at Yeovilton on 16 November 2000 but was later restored to non-airworthy condition by Everett Aero in Suffolk, and is now believed to be privately owned in the Manchester area. United States Sea Harrier FA2 serial number XZ439, Hawker Siddeley build number 912002 Knowles Aviation Street, Marys County, Maryland. The former Royal Navy Sea Harrier FA2 was purchased in 2006 by Art Knowles, who spent the next 2 years restoring it to flying condition. In December 2007, it was damaged in a hard landing while undergoing testing at Naval Air Station Patuxent River and had to be repaired. The aircraft made its first public appearance at an airshow in Culpeper, Virginia in October 2008. The aircraft is the only privately owned, civilian-flown Harrier in the world. Knowles recently purchased Sea Harrier T8ZD 993. Specifications. Data from Wilson, Bull, Donald Spick. General characteristics. Crew. 1. Length, 46 feet 6 in. Wingspan, 25 feet 3 in. Height, 12 feet 2 in. Wing area, 201.1 feet squared. Empty weight, 14,052 pounds. Max takeoff weight, 26,200 pounds. Power plant, 1 times Rolls-Royce Pegasus turbofan, 21,500 lbf. Performance maximum speed, 635 knots. Combat radius, 540 nmi. Ferry range, 1,740 nmi. Service ceiling, 51,000 feet. Rate of climb, 50,000 feet per minute. Armament guns, 2 times 30 mm Aden cannon pods under the fuselage, with 130 rounds each. Hardpoints, 4 times underwing pylon stations, and 1 fuselage pylon on centerline, plus 2 attach points for gun pods, with a total capability of 8,000 pounds of payload. Rockets, 4 times Matra rocket pods with 18 SNEB 68 mm rockets each. Missiles, air-to-air missiles, AIM-9 Sidewinder, AIM-120 AMR 550 Magic air-to-surface missile, Alarm anti-radiation missile, Martel missile, arm anti-ship missiles, Sea Eagle bombs, a variety of unguided iron bombs. Others, reconnaissance pods are 2 times auxiliary drop tanks for ferry flight or extended range loitering time. Avionics for anti-blue Vixen all-weather airborne radar. BAE Systems AD2770 Tactical Air Navigation System. Thales MAJ Microwave Airborne Digital Guidance Equipment. Allied Signal and APX-100 Mk12 IFF. Notable appearances in media. The Harrier's unique characteristics have led to it being featured in a number of films and video games.